Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of Crypto Convos. I'm your host, MK Lords, and joining me today is Susanne Tarkowski Templehof from Rio de Janeiro. She is the president of BitNation, which is a decentralized governance project. This is really interesting, and we're going to get to that in just a second. But first, I want to say how you're doing, Susanne.
Hi, MK. Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining me. And we're also going to be talking about, Suzanne just announced we're going to be doing the first marriage on the blockchain at Coins in the Kingdom next weekend. So we'll be talking about that in just a second. But I want to get to know Suzanne a little bit better. So what is your philosophical outlook, and how has that kind of changed throughout your life?
It changed very radically throughout my life. I grew up very left-wing, actually. My parents were not communist, but sort of as close as you can be to communism, without actually being one. And I grew up in Sweden, which was, at that point, very socialist, and still is to some degree. So I was very left-wing, but I was sort of always not very fond of the nation state and borders and all of that, because my family is national and always traveled and everything. And then I sort of went more middle of the road, and then I became more conservative, and then I went hardcore neocon at some point, and then I started to be like more and more libertarian, sort of small government libertarian, and finally anarcho-capitalist and anarchist, and I guess now I'm sort of like voluntarist. I just think people should be able to, we shouldn't have imaginary borders that prevents people from moving. We shouldn't have any governance imposed on us involuntarily, and people should just be able to choose themselves. That's all. And then I don't particularly care about economic model. If people want to live in a capitalist society, it's up to them. If you want to live in a sort of communist society, whatever, I don't really think the economic model is very interesting to discuss anymore. Yes, so just sort of straight voluntaries. So,
Awesome, and that also sounds a little bit, like panarchist too, which I definitely would agree with you on the voluntarism thing too. People should be able to pick and choose, what type of government they want to live under. I think that's fine with me. So, how did you find out about Bitcoin? What were your initial thoughts about it?
It was a really shocking moment in my life, actually. I was a government contractor for many years. For different governments, but mostly for the U.S. government, for the military and State Department and so forth. And I spent a lot of years, because I did think that the best way to achieve change was through working with the government, right? And I became like really disillusioned by the whole process. I spent like half a decade in war zones, trying to build governments or overthrow governments, and I lost trust in the process. I lost trust in the government. I just didn't see like sort of how to get out of it, right? Like how we could change stuff without the government or not through the government. And then one day I had a friend visiting me I was living in DC at the time. This was 2012. And I had a friend visiting me from California that actually ran into Afghanistan, sort of an old acquaintance, but he was sort of like a tech hipster of some sort, and he had like one of the coins printed in gold with him. And so he told me, he was like, "Have you seen this? Do you know what this is?" And I'm like, "No, what is that?" He's like, "It's called Bitcoin. It's like a new currency, and it's an international currency. It doesn't belong to the nation state. It's like it's controlled. It's made by a hacker. It's controlled by sort of the mass, right?" I was just shocked, because at that point, I realized that it was sort of possible to do stuff without the government, right? Like to just sort of reinvent a brand new system, not try to change elections, not try to do contracting or whatever, but just sort of reinvent stuff, like replace the government essentially, right? Like Bitcoin attempts to replace the financial system, right? So, yeah, from that moment on, that changed my entire life. I just started to read massively about Bitcoin and taken a really strong interest in it. And then Like down the road, I discovered like all meta protocols, like Mastercoin and Ripple and Ethereum and open transactions and all of that, and I sort of started to realize like the sort of non-currency things you could do with Bitcoin, like smart contracts and dispute resolution, all those things. And then, so yeah, so it's actually what I've been wanting like my whole life, like a sort of competing voluntary system for governance, came true and became like a realistic option all of a sudden. So yeah, it was a big moment for me, really.
That's awesome, because I was a little hesitant at first to jump into it. I was a little skeptical of it, but I wish I was maybe a little less skeptical looking back, because when I first heard about it, if I would have bought Bitcoin when I first actually heard of it and just kind of jumped in, I'd be doing a lot better right now. But I'm so glad to have found it, of course. And I really like that you brought up the other functions of blockchain, because a lot of times people want to focus on Bitcoin as a currency, but it's so much more than that. So what are some of the other functions of the blockchain that really capture your attention?
Well, blockchain in itself, actually, because that's sort of how when I talk to people who are not into Bitcoin or whatever, I'm trying to tell them, like, okay, well, forget about Bitcoin as a currency. The only thing you have to see in Bitcoin is that it's a distributed public ledger, right? Cryptographically secure distributed public ledger. So, like here in Brazil, everything gets notarized, like everything, like employment contract or a construction contract or whatever. They love the public notary, right? Which is a complete corrupt family system they inherit. So I tell them it's like a public notary, but you don't inherit it. It's like distributed amongst everybody who uses it. Everybody has a record of the records in the notary. So you can file whatever contract, and it's going to be binding because you can also attach it to like other assets, like whichever assets really, your marriage contract, and your ID system based on reputation. There's a whole ecosystem of it, right? So yeah, so I think just the basic function. Then if you look at sort of what I'm trying to do with BitNation, the sort of heart of it is the ID system and reputation system, because that basically enables all the other things, right? And also the dispute resolution part are probably the two most important functions.
All right, all right. And how did you come up with the idea of BitNation? When did you come up with that?
Well, actually, I had been thinking about it for like 10 years. I sort of started to write about voluntary competing government systems in my early 20s. Although, I wasn't even a libertarian or anarchist or anything back then. I just thought nation state was a bad system, right? So I had no idea that what I was thinking about was actually, anarchism or anarcho-capitalism, whatever you want to call it. So I discovered that a lot later, like half a decade later, right? And then, so in 2012, I stopped working with the government because I was really disillusioned, and I discovered Bitcoin and all those things, and I just decided to quit, and I got a book deal to write a book called Local Mountain, which I'm still writing, which I'm still working on, which was about that, right? Which was about how to create your own sort of virtual nation, for lack of a better word, and in a sort of competing fashion, right? And at that time, I still didn't understand. I understood what Bitcoin was, but I didn't understand the blockchain technology. That was sort of a discovery. I traveled around for like a year, talking to libertarians, anarchists, and Bitcoin enthusiasts, and so it took me like probably 1.5 years before I understood it, and then I just sort of sat down one day, in July, and I was like, okay, I really need to get this book written. And then I thought, why am I actually writing this book? Like, I can just do it actually, because now I know all the tools that I need, right? And I know exactly what the code is. I know who can do it. And I can just start it and then write about it after the fact, right? So, which then the story writes itself, So it's, so yeah, so that was sort of how my thinking, should I write it or should I do it, right? So yeah, I just decided to get on with it, right?
That's awesome. So what are all the services that BitNation offers, and who are some of the people working with you to make this a reality?
So basically, we have 5 rounds of services. So one is law, which is not, we don't provide an actual code of law. The code of law is entirely voluntary. So in the dispute resolution function, people can choose their own code of law, either upload a code of law or choose one of the ones we offer, right? But we don't impose one. And they can choose their own arbitrators or register themselves as an arbitrator if they want to. So that's the dispute resolution function, and then there's the family contracts, which is marriage, divorce, land deeds, land register land deeds, wills, childcare contracts, all of those things. Then the second strand is the corporate incorporation as well, the creation of DOs or DAOs on the blockchain, and obviously use that to raise funds for selling equity and trading equity, like on a stock market. And then there is the insurance part, which is mutual insurance based. So that's healthcare insurance, healthcare, pensions, employment, although it won't be available until next year because it's pretty complicated and ambitious, same with security and diplomacy, we're going to have that as well. But that won't be available until next year either. And then also we have what we call social services, and so far the only thing we come up with in social services is education, really, which will be more of an aggregation of already existing service providers out there, but get them into the system so people can use their ID and their credentials and their credit and all of that to make it better, So those are the service rounds, right? And plus, and it's built on a dApp library, so all of these services are in the shapes of dApps that people can download, or there's like API layers, people can fork the dApps and then redo them for their own local context or their specific needs, and then upload the dApp to a system and give it away or charge for it, whichever you prefer. So that's sort of how the ecosystem is built, right? And the ID system, of course, as I mentioned earlier. So that's the services. The people who are working with us right now, we're a core team of about 5 people, 5 to 10 people. It's a startup, so there is a lot of sort of movement in and out, right? But yeah, we're a small core team that are working pretty much everybody full time. And then we have about 20, 30 people who are consulting on a semi-regular basis, helping out here and there with small tasks. And then I think we have a community of interest of like maybe 100 people who participate in the chats and add comments and value and comment on the documents and participate in some way or another. So that's how the structure looks right now.
All right. So it's really ambitious. You're taking on a lot of different services at one time. So I would think that the biggest conflict to this would be the nation state, the government, seeing that you're making your own contracts and providing some of these services and trying to possibly stop you. What do you think how is BitNation going to be distributed so something like that doesn't happen? Or are you going to have it located in somewhere in Brazil, or are there other countries that maybe you're looking at that you think are going to be more amenable to what BitNation is wanting to do?
Well, there is 2 answers to that question. So when it comes to, or 3 actually, when it comes to, so BitNation is distributed both in the technology and in the human network that takes care of it, right? So in a technology term, it won't be decentralized at first. It will be a browser that people can download. So it's sort of decentralized in that way, but it's not a full-fledged P2P system yet, but we're working towards that. So it will be that over time. And it's decentralized also in the way that we're building this network of what we call ambassadors, which are essentially Bitcoin entrepreneurs all over the world, right, who can basically take what we do to their communities, fork it and do it on their own. And also BitNation is entirely forkable. I mean, it's all open source code, everything. And we want to be forked because we want people to create more and more and more alternative, right? So there is no, there is no single point of failure in the philosophy itself, if you will, because the code is out there, right? So a bit like Bitcoin. Even if you would try to take down and kill, every core developer, Bitcoin, like people will still create a new coin, right? So that's sort of part of the philosophy. So it's distributed in that way. But I mean, in terms of government attacks, I'm actually not that worried about it because I think providing governance tools is actually something governments try to do, especially if we look at Western governments, like US and UK, NATO, whatever. I mean, bad governance is, makes bad economies. Good governance empowers economies because then people can own things. They can borrow money, right? Because they can sell securities, etc. And bad economies essentially fuels wars and insurgencies and terrorism and all of those things. So we are providing this service for free, to a lot of people in frontier markets and emerging markets who need it the most, where those governance services doesn't exist. So I don't see why the government should come after us. I think they should be grateful.
What do you see as some possible conflicts that may come up in the future? Like, I guess one thing that comes to mind is I think having, you have the decentralized governance of BitNation and the documents that are put on the blockchain, they would be recognized as legitimate by the community, but maybe not so much as, to these outside governments. How are you going to deal with that problem, or do you think it's not really going to be much of an issue?
It sort of depends, right? I think it can definitely be used as a proof, in a government settlement. Just like, I mean, an email can be used as proof, really, or even a verbal agreement for that matter. And obviously, having something that is on a cryptographically secure public ledger is very hard proof, right? So I think it can definitely be used in any governance system. And then, I mean, in some societies it doesn't really matter because nobody would go to court anyways because they are too corrupt, or they just don't work, right? So in those societies, it's what's sort of commonly accepted as the court, whether that's sort of the neighborhood elders getting together, or if that's, or the local extortion racket, whatever. So then it's just about like common acceptance, right? So, and I mean, in general, I think it's a bit like Bitcoin, right? So when Bitcoin first started, people saw it as, a few geeks trading algorithms, nobody saw it as like money. But now that a critical mass is using it as a currency, then obviously everybody's starting to see it as a currency, including many governments. Like, some governments call it art, the Swedish government called it art, actually. Some call it securities, some call it whatever, but, I mean, it's widely recognized by governments too. So, yeah, it's just like it's enough like adoption, really.
All right. So you're going to be doing a marriage on the blockchain through BitNation at Coins in the Kingdom next weekend, and this is really interesting. Now, is this the first marriage on the blockchain?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
All right. And could you kind of go into some of the details there? How did that idea kind of come about, and what do you have planned? I'm also organizing Coins in the Kingdom. I've been talking to David and you both about it, but why don't you tell the viewers what the wedding's going to be like?
Well, essentially, so we're having a panel on Coins in the Kingdom, right? And we weren't sort of we were just thinking about having a normal panel, and then someone who owns like a Bitcoin ATM company said on one of our public Skype chats, or semi-public Skype chats, said, hey, I'm going to be there with my Bitcoin ATM machine, someone could get married for it. You know? Like, don't you want to have BitNation? Don't you want to have someone from your team getting married? And we thought of it, and we were like, yeah, that's a brilliant idea. Why not, right? So yeah, it sort of came quite spontaneously, and then it all happened spontaneously. So it's really cool. I mean, I love it. It's fantastic that the sort of first thing we do is like an act of love, right? I find that really beautiful. So yeah, so essentially, Titania Morris is going to do a bit of singing, I believe, first. And so it's going to be a wedding ceremony. It's going to be a little bit Disney style, obviously, since it's at Disney World. So the bride is going to be dressed like some Disney character. I don't know which one. That's a surprise. Jeffrey Tucker is going to officiate it, which I think is the absolutely best choice it could be, because he's so well-spoken, eloquent, just a wonderful person. Right? So, yeah, so I'm very excited about it. I mean, not as much as they are, obviously, David and Joyce. So, yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah, so that'll be happening next Sunday. I believe yeah, I have it scheduled around 10 o'clock, 10:15. So there will be the marriage ceremony, and then there will also be a BitNation panel after that to kind of talk more about BitNation too. So definitely, if you're in the Orlando area, check that out. Or if you're wanting to come to the conference, tickets are super cheap. So $60 gets you to the conference, and you get to the wedding. And I love weddings. I'm really excited about this wedding, by the way. So yeah, this is just another example of things you can do that maybe people don't necessarily know about. And do you think this will kind of, generate discussion among, just regular people? Because right now people are still in the mindset that, we're just talking about currency. Do you think this will kind of spark conversation about some of the other uses of the blockchain?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's such an easy concept for people to grasp. Everybody can picture a marriage, right? If you say corporate incorporation, it's a little bit more abstract, but marriage is very simple. You just file a contract and boom, there you go. You're married, right, on the blockchain. So then people can really use the concept to grasp Bitcoin as a public ledger, right, rather than as a currency. So, which I think is great. And it's also, I mean, people love to talk about. It's such a nice thing it's like a happy thing to talk about, right? And I think, I mean, another community we want to reach out to with this is the gay communities and the polyamorous communities in the Western Hemisphere, because they can't get married, right? And they still need a contract to divide their assets, to secure their assets, to decide if they want to share their assets or share some assets and not others. And I mean, so you can do that, right, with a smart contract, and also like tie, your company to it, or tie your identity, definitely, your deeds, your childcare contract, wills, everything into that contract, right? So I think that's going to be really powerful for those communities. We haven't actually reached out to them enough, but yeah, I really want to get that message out.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point, because right now most states here, they don't recognize gay marriage, and there have been people who've been wanting to get married that have been in relationships for decades, and it's about time that government catches up with the rest of society. But I think this is maybe even more important, because this is something, this kind of futuristic application that's basically coming and saying, we don't need this government to recognize the blockchain. The blockchain is eternal, so get married on the blockchain. And I definitely would like to see more of those communities involved, because this is something that anyone should be able to do, whether or not there's a law permitting it.
Right. I mean, what does the government have to do with marriage in the first place?
Hmm?
I mean, why is the government involved in marriage in the first place, right?
Right. Yeah. It doesn't. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I say that as a legally married person. I got legally married before I became an anarchist. Now I'm kind of looking back and being like, should have just got married on the blockchain. But skip the paperwork.
And marriage on the blockchain, then you're free. interference. Right? I mean, seriously, I think it's perverted. Like, I mean, I went through this process last year, right? Like sitting in the government offices, answering questions about our relationship. Like, what? You know, and getting an approval if we're allowed to get married, right? I mean, it's so bizarre. Why should the government approve my personal choices? Yeah, I don't know. I find it like really ridiculous.
Yeah, and these changes, I like to kind of think far in the future with this stuff, and I want it to kind of happen now, but we're still kind of a long way away from, because a lot of it is a mindset. People have to break the mindset that they need to be asking the government permission to do things that don't require the government in the first place. So we're still a little bit ways away from that, but hopefully people will start seeing, more of these, these individuals coming together and saying, we want to use this technology to make contracts and, verify all the things. We don't need government to do this.
Exactly. And then, I mean, that's what I think will happen, right? Because right now the government is so bloated and they have a hand in everything. I mean, I used to have a property in Pennsylvania. I still have it actually, but I don't. I sort of, yeah. Anyways, I had like fines because there was like snow falling off my roof, and because my grass was like 1 inch too high. Someone actually wanted to measure the grass, the height of my grass on my private property, and send me fines. And then I was away abroad, so I didn't even shake my mails for a couple of months. But the fines turned into arrest warrants. So I got like 7 arrest warrants for not cutting the grass on my own property. I mean, it's just become the sort of micromanagement of the government has become so completely absurd, right? So, and that's unprecedented in history. I mean, governments may have been much more brutal and worse before, but now they are so intrusive, right? So they control like every single little aspect of everything. So I think the backlash against that is going to be that people are just going to get tired of it. I mean, the libertarian movement is growing, and I don't think there will be like a violent overthrow of the government or anything like that. I just think like the private sector will just replace one service after the other, and with like, as they have, smarter and cheaper solutions that are more fair and voluntary, and that's sort of unstoppable. It's like, Uber versus the, centralized cab unions, right? I mean,
yeah, and like you mentioned, it's very, very much a soft kind of fascism. I mean, really, they're just, saying things like you can't collect rainwater in certain areas, or, you can't, if you have a little pile of trash or something, it's a code violation, or just ridiculous things. And oftentimes, people don't realize that the government, or code enforcement in particular, targets poor communities with these fines to keep them down. Like, I think a lot of people see government as a nuisance, but it's also more than just a nuisance. Sometimes it's just downright destructive towards people who are struggling to get by. If you look at in a lot of cities, especially where I live, code enforcement tends to target the poorest neighborhoods. I mean, I've even gotten contacted by whistleblowers from former code enforcement whistleblowers saying like, yeah, I mean, they were having people writing $400-$500 fines in the poorest neighborhoods for ridiculous things like, maybe the grass was a little bit too tall or something like that. Or maybe it wasn't the grass, or like something, broken window or something like that. So it's really gotten kind of ridiculous, and I guess I'm kind of somewhere in between. I would hope that things could be kind of changed non-violently. That would definitely be my ideal, and hopefully seeing people, instead of just, the violent overthrow, because I just don't think that's tactically possible at this point. People are just kind of saying, I'm going to refuse to use services, and let's move over to this other technology that seems to be a better alternative. So it comes down to competition.
Yeah, and I mean that's a proposition of Bitcoin, right? I mean, Bitcoin simply created a better currency. Like, it didn't do anything harmful to anyone. It didn't like say anything bad about the government. Nothing. It just simply created a better protocol. Mm-hmm. It's so simple, right? I just love it. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. And what do you think about some of these kinds of claims, that Bitcoin, or I saw this horrible article, I don't know if you saw it, by the BBC about, they interviewed Peter Todd and Amir Taki, and they were saying, oh, well, maybe, dark wallet is going to be used by terrorists or something like that. What do you think of this kind of media campaign? against Bitcoin, like the highlighting the kind of darknet aspects of or even dark wallet too.
Well, I think that sort of, oh, it can be used by terrorists is a ridiculous claim. Like cars are used by terrorists, like roads are used by terrorists. Terrorists lives in houses, they breathe air, they watch movies. It's not because, that is such a weird guilt by association. It's not because a terrorist used something that is inherently bad, because then everything is bad, and food is bad, and water is bad, right? Where do you stop that sort of weird guilt by association type of thing, right? But should we like cut into it because terrorists may use that, right? That's just a trade-off we have to live with, right? But on the other hand, I can sort of understand. I read an article. I haven't actually seen the documentary, but I read an article in Cointelegraph about it, where they said like, oh, the community is a bit upset because they like went too far, saying like, ooh, hey, yay anarchism type of thing. And I can sort of sympathize with that sentiment a bit because, if you want to create a dark wallet, why do you go around calling it a dark wallet? It's like saying, hey, we're bad guys, come and catch us. Like, what's really hard what we're doing is put like all surveillance you have out there because we're going to destroy the system, right? I just don't think it's a very tactically good. They should have called it like pink unicorn wallet, or something like that.
I've definitely seen that same criticism of Dark Wallet. I was like reading a Reddit thread. They were like, it should be called Rainbow Wallet or something like that. It's so yeah. Some people express that they have issue with the branding of it, but I think it was done on purpose. By Amir and Cody, especially. I had to interview Cody several months ago in February, and basically what he did with the 3D printed gun thing is he put it out there, didn't ask permission, didn't really publicize it a whole lot, just put it out there to kind of force their hand to decide, like, are you going to make legislation to stop this? Well, it's open source, it can't be stopped, we're already doing it. And I think with Dark Wallet there's been a lot of excitement around it, and as far as it being a branding thing, I definitely see that argument, but I also kind of think that you reach a certain point, I guess, or I guess some people reach a certain point where they just want to say, screw it, like we're not gonna like try to lie or try to like say, what we're not, we're not about money laundering, or we're not gonna use this for bad purposes. I think in a lot of ways the dark net in general kind of gets a bad rap because of that word, the word dark associated with it, but it actually provides a lot of really useful purposes. And it was same with Dark Wallet. If it really starts becoming successful and it actually works and is truly anonymous, then that's going to be a great thing, very empowering for a lot of people. And I definitely get the criticism, but yeah, that's Cody and Amir being real edgy and kind of putting it out there. So what do you kind of think?
I think there is something very refreshing about it, and it do have the effect of sort of inspiring the community and giving hope and stuff. That is true.
Yeah. So what do you think, because there does kind of seem to be a divide with the pro-regulation people and kind of, more anti-regulation. Well, where do you fall on kind of the regulation side of things? Because I think people like Cody and Amir, they're putting Dark Wallet out there, and they're very much like, try and regulate it. And you just kind of see some pro-regulation folks being like, oh, we really don't need to emphasize some of these darker parts. We need to kind of de-emphasize this to make it seem safer, so that maybe the regulation isn't so bad when it does come. Do you think regulation is kind of inevitable?
Do you mean for BitNation?
Yeah, for BitNation too. Yeah.
Well, in the context of BitNation, because we are not, I'm a Swedish citizen, and in Sweden, equity crowdfunding is perfectly legal, so I'm not technically breaking any law. We are going to be incorporated straight on the blockchain, though we don't have a legal entity, but again, I don't think that's a problem. And again, in Sweden, they consider Bitcoin as art, so it's a quite strange regulation, but that's what it is anyway. So. And what we're doing is frankly quite inoffensive towards the US, because the US is the biggest threat, right? They are the ones that are really cracking down on crypto more than others, and the SEC is like sort of all over the space and stuff like that. So, but since we're not Americans and we don't target Americans, we target developing markets and emerging markets, and we target them to improve governance tools. That's something that should be in the interest of the U.S. government, to for greater sort of world security purposes, right? To create more stable economies, right? So I don't think we're much of a target actually for any government or any country at the moment. So we are like totally unregulated, but not because of sort of like fuck you stance, but more because I mean, there is just no purpose in it. And that's also what we are saying, right? Like you can do these things without the government, so then it would be sort of counterintuitive to go and set up a legal entity when we are saying like, don't set up a legal entity, just incorporate the blockchain. So yeah, so that's our sort of legal stance, or lack thereof, rather. So I don't know. Some people call it risky. I don't think it's risky at all because of the non-US aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Are there any specific countries you see as being very blockchain friendly because they're not so harsh on regulations? Any specific countries come to mind that you think this is going to take off more in, where it may be suppressed in maybe even the States? I think especially with these regulations coming out of New York, you're kind of seeing like, whoa, they're really trying to bring the hammer down on the exchanges at least. It's looking pretty bad.
Yeah, you are just breaking up a little bit. Can you just repeat like the beginning of the sentence? I missed the question.
Oh yeah. Are there any specific countries that you see as being particularly favorable to blockchain technology?
Hello? Hello?
And we're back, I think.
No worries, it happens to me all the time.
It wouldn't be a hangout on air unless we got kicked off, so.
Yeah.
So you had started to give the answer. That's right, when it kicked me out. So what were you going to say?
Yeah, so I think there are two categories of markets where it will take off. So one of them are countries with high remittance payments, meaning people working abroad and sending money home. So two typical countries would be Mexico and the Philippines. They both have like a large part of their GDP consisting of remittance payments, right? And of course, with Bitcoin, it's much more intuitive because it costs nothing and it's instant, rather than whatever other system. So that is definitely one. And then the other categories, countries that always sort of default, on their economy or their currency, like Cyprus, Argentina, Greece, like all the basket cases. They are obviously a given audience. And then, I mean, we've gotten a lot of interest from around the place, actually. Like, we have a lot of like people interested in like Ghana, Sierra Leone, Botswana, actually, Australia. So, I mean, from our ambassador network, have really become sort of, even this is rather few people at the moment. It's like a very worldwide representation from basically every single continent. So, people in India, people in Russia, Europe, Eastern Europe, especially. So yeah, so that is pretty cool.
Awesome. And since we're kind of experiencing technical difficulties, I'm probably going to wrap it up just a little bit early. So are there any audience questions? It looks like we only have a couple viewers. Would anyone like to submit questions before I ask for final thoughts? Going once, going twice. All right. Susanne, do you have any final thoughts for us?
Final thoughts?
On anything.
On anything.
BitNation, or blockchain technology, or just anything. Any final thoughts at all? Philosophy-wise, whatever.
All right. Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time in history right now, and I think everybody should cooperate, work together as a community. Like, regardless if you believe in Bitcoin or not as a thing, regardless if you understand the blockchain technology or not. But what is sure, is that it's much easier to simply provide better services to replace the government rather than trying to work from the inside to change the government from the inside, right? So I think everybody who has some sort of libertarian leaning, even if they're not full-fledged anarchists, whatever, should sort of come together around this movement. Not just BitNation, but like other projects in this area as well, like Ethereum, open transactions, Counterparty, um, Ripple. I could name quite a few. It's just a really exciting time and space to be in. So I really recommend everybody to take a hard look at it and try to contribute where you can, because it's my absolutely firm belief that this is going to absolutely revolutionize everything as we know it.
Awesome. And where can people keep up with your work?
Excuse me?
Where can people keep up with your work? Where can they find out more about BitNation and any other projects you're involved in?
Well, there is a Facebook page, BitNation. We have our Twitter, @mybitnation. And then our website, obviously, which will be updated very soon. And then if people want to get engaged, the best way to get engaged is for Skype chats. So the way to do that is just to send an email to info@bitnation.co, and with sort of saying, I want to be engaged in the conversation, and here's my Skype ID, and then someone from the organization would add them on Skype and add them into the relevant channels. We have about 10 different channels to discuss various topics, right? So that's sort of where the community comes together and debate things. So yeah, and I mean we are very inclusive. We want to work with a lot of projects out there. We want really community buy-in, the community engaged in every step of the process. So we are just happy for everybody who wants to come in and comment and participate in whatever capacity, so yeah.
All right, excellent. And it looks like Nathan Rosen shared a link for it. Bitnation.co is the website. And I'm also going to, really quickly, also share the Facebook page. So I'll select that so people can follow that link. Definitely check out BitNation. This is a really ambitious project. They're trying to do a whole lot and really show all of the different abilities that the blockchain has. And hopefully, we'll be sparking more conversation about this. And definitely check out the first Bit Marriage next weekend at Coins in the Kingdom. It's going to be really cool. And definitely come check out the conference. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. It's the heart of Disney World. Sorry, in Orlando. So check that out. And next week's guest is to be announced. I will be hopefully having someone on from Coins in the Kingdom. So stay tuned. And until next time, keep calm and encrypt on.